Hello, 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 and welcome to an integrated approach to inclusion and social emotional learning, presented by our good friend and accomplice, Sam Drazin. Sam is a nationally recognized educator and change maker. He's the founder and executive director of Changing Perspectives, and they have a mission. He has a mission to strengthen school communities through social emotional learning, disability awareness, empathy development, and inclusion. Sam was born with Treacher-Collins syndrome, a rare congenital disorder resulting in both facial anomaly and hearing loss. His experiences, both as a student with a disability and as a teacher working in an inclusive classroom, helped him recognize the importance of supporting students in developing the essential life and relationship skills that underpin equity, inclusion, and social change. The students and educators he works with around the nation are a constant inspiration, and he is for us. So they are for him, and Sam is for us. My name is Dan Daher. I am a program specialist with the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project. I am thrilled and excited to be your moderator for this breakout session. I am joined by my partner in crime and colleague, our coordinator, Janelle Mercado, and she will be co-moderating with me. Just a few logistics to get us started. The session will be recorded and will be archived in the conference agenda page after the conference for about a month. Closed captioning is available by clicking on the CC button at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. The interpretation icon in the same area will provide access to Spanish translation. We will ensure the ASL interpreters are spotlighted along with the PowerPoint and the presenter. Please make sure your volume is muted to avoid background distractions while presenters are speaking. We encourage you to engage with others in the chat and, when possible, keep your camera on so we can see your lovely faces. And with that, we will turn it over to Sam and begin our session.
Thank you, Dan, for that wonderful introduction. I feel like I really have to rise to the occasion now that you built me up with sharing a little bit about me. I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you to the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project for inviting me to speak this morning. I would love to get started by having folks, we've got a lot of people on today's session, which is really exciting. Would love to get started though, have folks take a moment to, rather than introduce yourselves in the chat, let's just put a one word that we're thinking about right now as we start today's breakout session around the intersections between inclusion and social emotional learning. So if you could just put one word, whether you're curious, whether you're motivated, whether you're confused by this topic, what are you feeling right now about this topic by this title? Thanks, Jade, for getting us kicked off. Starting to see some patterns here in some of the words. We've got interested, opportunity, needed, hopeful, a lot of interested, excited, optimistic, love it, wonderings. Someone else, I think, wrote, what does this mean? I love that people aren't afraid to come to a session, even if they're not exactly quite sure what it's about. Implementation, maybe folks looking for specific strategies. As Dan said, I really encourage you to keep a conversation going in the chat as I present. And full disclaimer, like many of you, I am at a school right now. I was doing some fun work with third graders this morning around social emotional learning and but if you hear background noise, that would be why. We're going to go to the next slide. So this session is an integrated approach to inclusion and social emotional learning, two kind of concepts that I would say tend to be put in silos and put on a shelf and then pulled down and implemented separately from each other. And my hope today is really to help you better understand the alignment and the connection between two of these practices. Next slide. As Dan said, my name is Sam Drazin. I am a former classroom teacher, the current executive director and founder of an educational nonprofit called Changing Perspectives, and someone who lives with a disability. I put my email address up here on the screen. I will also drop it in the chat. As always, whenever I present, I say I hope this isn't the end of my relationship with all of you, but rather just the beginning. I encourage you to shoot me an email after today's session or connect on social media if you'd like to discuss today's session or anything else related to these important topics further. Changing Perspectives is really honored to be an ongoing partner with the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project. We are a nonprofit organization who partner and collaborate with schools and districts to support their work in both social emotional learning and cultivating inclusive and equitable learning communities. We do our work by providing schools access to SEL and disability awareness curriculum. We provide schools with educator professional development through trainings, coaching, and site visits. And we also work with schools to engage and support family engagement programs as well. I put our website up on the screen, and I will drop our website in the chat right now as well. I invite you to check us out, follow us on social media, and stay connected. With that, I want to talk about what the objectives are of today's session together. We're talking about two different concepts, social emotional learning and inclusion. So it's really important before we begin that we start to define what we're talking about. So we'll begin by defining SEL. After that, we'll really look at, well, what are those connections, those points of intersectionality between SEL and inclusion and inclusive practices? And then lastly, we're going to be talking about, well, what are the practical strategies that you can use? As representatives from a variety of schools and districts, I want to encourage you to think about two things as we go through today's workshop. One, I want you to think about what can you take away for your own knowledge and your own practice. And two, I want you to think about what can you take away that you can share with others in your building. You can share with others in your district. Because this isn't just about changing your practice, or no pun intended, perspective on these concepts, but it's also about arming you and equipping you with knowledge and tools and models and resources that you can share with others to help them break down the barrier between social emotional learning and inclusion and inclusive practices. We are going to have time at the end for questions, but feel free throughout my presentation to drop any questions, comments, resources, concerns, wonderings in the chat as we go. And my esteemed colleagues, Dan and Janelle from the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project will monitor the chat. Since COVID, social emotional learning, or SEL, has definitely become a more popular buzzword. SEL is not something that's new. It's been around a long time, but it's something we're hearing a lot more about over the last 3 years. I feel like a lot of times people have misconceptions around what SEL is, and they think it's, kind of hippie, or it's kumbaya by the fire, or it's just anti-bullying, or it's teaching kids to be nice. Social emotional learning is essentially a set of transferable universal skills that we use throughout our entire lives. So these are skills that students are developing, perhaps in school or at home, but they're going to apply them wherever they are in life, whether that's in school, family life, post-secondary education, career opportunities. These really are the foundational skills for lifelong success. I know for me, when I was a kid, I had to memorize everything in school. right? Because this was pre-Google. I think this was even pre-Alta Vista, if anyone remembers Alta Vista. And even in my house growing up, we had the Encyclopedia Britannicas in the living room, right? Like that's where you had to go to get information. Today's world, to be successful in the 21st century global marketplace, you don't need to memorize things because you can look everything up on, you can't see it because of the background. You can look everything up on your phone, right? Kids these days always say to me, if I don't know how to do something, I just go to YouTube. I figure it out there. What skills do we need to be successful in a global marketplace? We need to communicate. We need to collaborate. We need to have empathy. We need to be able to see multiple perspectives on a given situation or problem. All of those things are rooted in social emotional learning. CASEL is the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. They are probably the national, if not international, leaders in policy work and research work around social emotional learning. And what they've done is they've taken this somewhat kind of vague or abstract concept of SEL, and they've been able to dilute it into 5 distinct, what they call competencies. Self-awareness, which I describe as the adjectives to describe who we are. Self-management, which I think about as the verbs for how we act, how we manage our behavior, how we set goals for ourselves. Social awareness is where we broaden the lens away from ourselves to others, and that's where we think about empathy skills, perspective taking, valuing diverse communities. Then we get to relationship skills, where we're helping our students develop skills around friendships, being a leader, teamwork, problem solving, conflict resolution. And lastly, we get to responsible decision making, helping students evaluate the consequences of a decision, being able to think about how a decision doesn't just impact them and others, thinking about the moral and ethical implications of a decision. So this is all SEL, right? So it's so much more than what a lot of us think about, which is just kindness and anti-bullying. And so we really want to understand that SEL is deep, it's complex, but at the end of the day, all of these skills are transferable and universal that students will use throughout their entire lives. So that's just a brief overview on what SEL is. I know for some folks on today's call, this might be new information. For other folks, maybe you already knew this, but I think it's really important we have a baseline here for what we're talking about. When we teach SEL, we can teach SEL in 2 ways, and they're both equally important. One is not mutually exclusive of the other. There's proactive teaching of SEL. Proactive teaching of SEL is when we are explicitly teaching an SEL lesson or skill to students. So that's like when you're opening up your SEL curriculum and you're doing a lesson, or you're reading a book and having a discussion, or you're watching a film and having students respond in a written text, right? So proactive SEL is teaching an explicit skill or lesson to students. Reactive SEL is when, as adults, we facilitate students as they practice, sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully, both have value, as students practice those skills. So reactive is when we're doing restorative justice, when we're helping students resolve conflicts, when we're supporting students as they're figuring out who they are and their identity. A lot of people forget about this idea of reactive SEL, and schools come to me and they go, we don't have the time to do this. I can't do a lesson every day. And I ask them to pause and take a step back and really think about all the times throughout the day that they are actually doing reactive SEL. Now, the value, folks, of taking the time to do proactive SEL instruction is that helps you develop common language with your students that you can utilize when you are then supporting them reactively. All right, next slide. So as we start to now migrate into kind of the connections between SEL and inclusion and inclusive practices, SEL benefits all students, whether those students have an IEP, a 504, whether those students are coming from a socioeconomically challenged family, whether those students are ELL. Social emotional learning benefits all. Inclusion and inclusive education benefits all. At the end of the day, what we are talking about is tier 1 intervention. This is universal design for learning. This is being mindful of our practice and tweaking things to embed SEL and inclusion together simultaneously, which regardless of who our population is, it will support them. The best example I like to give to explain UDL, Universal Design for Learning, is what's called the curb effect. The curb effect is where our sidewalks dip down into kind of a sloping ramp to go across into a crosswalk. The curb effect was a result of ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, to ensure that individuals using wheelchairs were able to get from the sidewalk to the crosswalk. But what I challenge you to think about is who are all the other people that the curb effect helps? Well, it helps folks who are pushing strollers across the street. It helps folks who are delivering packages to cross the street. It helps folks on bikes, on scooters. It helps older people who that step down just could be a big hurdle. It helps toddlers who are learning how to walk, and many, many other folks. So this one infrastructural change to make our sidewalks kind of flow into a ramp, to lead into a crosswalk, to help one group of individuals who use wheelchairs, actually helps everybody. And that's what SEL does. And that's what inclusive practice does. Now, this is a big mindset shift for some educators and some administrators. In order to really start to think about how do we put SEL and inclusive practices in practice simultaneously and with intentionality, we've got to shift people's mindset in this way. So I know that today's conference is all about inclusion. So I didn't put how social emotional learning promotes inclusion. What I wanted to do is put how inclusion promotes social emotional growth for capital, no, it's not an AR, capital ALL students, right? So when we create inclusive opportunities for all of our learners, we inherently are actually providing opportunities for all of our learners to grow socially and emotionally as well. So a few bullet points to explain this further on the next slide. All right, so how does inclusion organically promote SEL? When we have students learning and playing together of differing abilities, it gives us a playground to allow students to think about empathy and perspective taking in a new way. I often say that awareness is the foundation for empathy. Empathy is understanding how someone else experiences the world. If we don't ever talk about how other people experience the world, there's no way that we can have empathy for them. So when we bring students together who come from differing cultures or have different abilities and or disabilities, it gives us an opportunity to allow students to really reflect and think and question and build empathy towards others. When we bring students together of varying abilities, we provide a place and a space for students to organically practice collaboration and communication skills. When it comes to communication, students learn that we don't all communicate the same way. Some of us communicate with our voice. Some of us communicate with an AAC device. Some of us communicate with our body language. Lots of different ways that we communicate. Collaboration. If you have a group of students together working on a project of differing abilities, they need to think about what their strengths are that they bring to the group, how they can use their strengths to collaborate with their classmates to achieve the goal or the project that they're working on. Relationship and social skills. Again, I'm just going to remind folks, we have the chat as well as the Q&A. So please feel free to drop your questions in as I go along so we have them to answer towards the end. Relationship skills and social skills. Again, this idea of like building friendships. It's easy to build friendships with people who are just like you. It's a little harder to build friendships with people who are different. It allows us to practice social skills, which come more inherently to some people than others. And I feel like when we bring people together who are different, we kind of jump to social awareness first, right? Like, oh, we want kids to learn about each other, to build that awareness so they have empathy, so they can be in the inclusion change makers of tomorrow. But ultimately, when we bring students together of diverse abilities, it doesn't just promote respect and understanding and awareness of those who are different, but it also allows us time to reflect on ourselves and consider who we are. What is our self-awareness? How am I the same and how am I different from those around me? And recognizing that we're celebrating those differences in positive ways. And those differences are going to help us be more effective in collaboration, help us be more effective in perspective taking, help us be more effective in respectful communication. So just a few bullet points to help us understand how inclusion kind of automatically is promoting SEL, even if we're not super intentional with it. Next slide. I love this one. SEL is everywhere. Again, we like to silo things in schools. I don't understand, but we do, right? And it's, Mrs. Jones is coming in and she's the school counselor and she's going to teach SEL from 9 to 9:30 on Tuesday morning. And then Mrs. Jones is going to leave. SEL doesn't just happen between 9 to 9:30 with Mrs. Jones on Tuesday morning. SEL is happening all the time, both reactively and proactively. SEL is happening in all of the places and spaces that make up our school sites. Oftentimes, the reactive opportunities are happening in the less structured environments, like the hallways, the cafeterias, the playground, and the courtyard. And the SEL proactive is happening a little more in the structured places, perhaps the classrooms, gym, music, art. I invite and encourage you to make a list of all the places and spaces that make up your school site. Some schools have gardens, some schools, if you're at the high school level, you might have a vocational center. So be aware of all the places and spaces that make up your site and really start to consider how this idea of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making play their role in all the places and spaces. Now, guess what? SEL doesn't just happen everywhere. No, you're right, Danny. Next slide. Inclusion also happens everywhere, right? Like, that's the idea. SEL is happening everywhere. Social and inclusion and inclusive practices is happening everywhere. Inclusion is not just isolated to the classroom as well. It's not something that just happens in a gen ed class or an SDC class or whatever. Authentic and true and holistic inclusive practices that really create a sense of belonging for all students, Give students the sense of feeling loud and proud about who they are in their school site. Students being able to better advocate for themselves. This is happening everywhere, or should be happening everywhere. And again, when I work with schools, a lot of times they want me to help them. They bring in changing perspectives to help them create a classroom to be more inclusive. But it's not just in the classroom, it's everywhere. It is everywhere. Now, just like we had proactive and reactive social emotional learning, we have a similar model when it comes to inclusion. In this model, I call it intentional versus unintentional inclusion. Intentional inclusion is when we design spaces and places, or put protocols in place, or master scheduling, or we differentiate curriculum, etc. All of those tools to ensure that all students can participate in, Danny, can you go back to the previous slide? In all of the places and spaces that make up our school. All right, now go ahead again, please. Now, unintentional inclusion is when students make inclusive choices unprompted. Okay, so there's a big difference there. Unintentional inclusion is when a student recognizes that there is another student or a group of students that doesn't feel, or are presenting as if they don't feel they belong, or presenting as if they don't have access or equal opportunity. And the student is the inclusive change maker, and they are going over and including that student. Or the student is augmenting something or modifying something to include another student. Now, again, just like proactive and reactive social emotional learning, oftentimes we need the intentional inclusion and the intentional inclusive practices to influence and provide students the skills they need to demonstrate unintentional inclusion. But what I want you to start to recognize here is that there are all of these commonalities and connections between what we're doing with SEL and what we're doing in inclusion. SEL and inclusion are both happening everywhere. SEL is proactive, we're teaching skills. Reactive, we're facilitating and guiding skills. Inclusion, we're making intentional choices in our teaching practice and our systems and our structures to include all students, while simultaneously cultivating an inclusive mindset and a community in which all students are able to make unintentional inclusive choices, where they are including others in an adult unprompted way, which really is the dream, right? Wouldn't the dream be that adults and teachers can just be there to facilitate learning, to facilitate social interaction, rather than always having to be the ones that are kind of herding students to it? Next slide. So with that being said, we need to collectively think about how we take SEL, which is often siloed, Mrs. Jones, a school counselor, a school social worker, a PBIS coordinator, whomever, is going into classrooms and doing explicit teaching, proactive teaching, and inclusion, which oftentimes is kind of linked to special education. How do we take both of those kind of silos off the shelf, and how do we put them together? It's not about adding more to people's plates. SEL and inclusion should already be on your plate. It's a part of what we are already doing every day. The question is, and the challenge is, how do we do it in intentional ways so students make unintentionally inclusive choices, and teachers are able to more successfully react and facilitate to students as they practice their SEL skills. Again, feel free to drop questions in the Q&A, any sort of comments or ideas, wonderings, hesitations in the chat. So a few recaps, and you might want to, like, if you're thinking like, oh my God, I really need to change mindsets in my school. Amber, yes, I love it. SEL is the play. It is. It is. We got to get people to think that way. When you think that way, it's so much easier, right? So this is a great slide. You might want to just take a screenshot of it, take a picture of it with your phone if you don't remember anything else from today's presentation. Here are the bullet points. SEL and inclusion are married. They are aligned. Both are occurring in all of the places and spaces that make up your school site. Both of these things support all students. I think a lot of times we think of SEL just for gen ed students. We don't even include students with disabilities in our SEL practice, right? SEL and inclusion is UDL, benefits for all. Both SEL and inclusion are done explicitly through proactive teaching or intentional inclusion, and they're done inexplicably through the reactive responses to SEL and the unintentional inclusive practices. So what I'd like to do is use the next few minutes to go over some strategies that you can use, and then we're going to open it up to the floor for a Q&A because we have a lot of people here, and I've been talking for a while, and I want to hear from all of you. So what are ways that you can start to take this idea and put it into action in your school? One, really think about how do we link our explicit SEL instruction with skills that support inclusive behavior. So when your school is thinking about what SEL lessons to teach, like that proactive SEL, really be thinking about what skill sets or objectives could you teach that don't just support SEL, but are also tailored or could influence where your school or system is trying to go when it comes to inclusive behavior and inclusive practices. SEL instruction and teaching is inclusive to students with and without disabilities. Again, one of the things I find in a lot of the schools that I go to is that they're teaching SEL to the gen ed students, but not to the students in the SDC classrooms. So think about how can our SEL instruction be differentiated so students with and without disabilities can be learning SEL together. That's really, really, really key. Now, in order for that to happen, it takes communication. Again, one of the things I find in schools, we love our different committees. I find that in a lot of schools, there might be like a diversity, equity, and inclusion, or an inclusion committee. And then separately, there's an SEL committee. Or maybe you have an inclusion interventionist in your school, and you have an SEL interventionist in your school. My question to you is, how often are those two folks talking, or are those different groups of people talking? We need to provide opportunities for co-planning with the individual or individuals in our schools and our systems that are working on SEL and working on inclusion to really think about how we marry the two. Develop visuals to show the alignment between SEL and inclusive practices. I know a lot of schools have like their PBIS matrices to show like behavioral expectations. I would really encourage you to think about how can you create a similar matrix or graphic that you can share with your staff to help them see how these two areas are connected. So if you have, 3 sort of behavioral expectations in your school, like respectful, kindness, and safety, right? Have those along one side of your matrix. And then what are your inclusion areas, right? Everyone belongs, everyone has a voice, etc. You should be linking up, right? You all, 100+ people are here by choice right now. So I know I'm somewhat preaching to the choir. What we have to figure out is how can we present this information in a very digestible way to allow other people to really see it in this new mindset. Common language between SEL and inclusion. The language that we're using, the skills that we're using, that we're teaching students to manage their behavior, to maintain friendships, and all of that within SEL, we should be using those same words when we're talking about inclusion. There's no reason why you can't have SEL goals in a student's 504 plan or IEP, right? That's a perfect marriage right there. Why do we not do that? I don't know. We also need to provide training on both SEL and inclusion to capital ALL staff. Again, SEL and inclusion is not just isolated to a singular classroom. This is happening everywhere. We need to ensure that our individuals that are on recess duty, that are welcoming students in the morning, if you have like a courtyard, students in the cafeteria, hallways, all those unstructured times are perfect opportunities for reactive SEL and unintentional inclusion. The staff that is supervising students during this time need to be trained. We need to make sure our unified arts teacher are trained. I know some districts contract out for art, music, PE. Those districts should be asking those contracting agencies, how well versed are your staff in SEL and inclusion, right? Because it's happening in gym, it's happening in art. We need to provide training. One way to support students with IEPs or 504s in SEL is collaborating with SLPs, OTs, PTs, clinicians, other interventionists that are supporting our students that could be reinforcing some of the SEL skill building with them. So I know a lot of this is about communication and structures and about being mindful and intentional in linking our SEL instruction with our inclusive goals. And I know oftentimes people are like, well, I really want a super tangible tool, but like, these are the tools for this. By doing these things, everything else will kind of fall into place.
Hey, Sam, before we move on, there's a question in the chat, and it was, in essence, in what grades can SEL be taught or implemented?
In what grades can SEL be taught or implemented? I would
Yep.
say it should start as early as we can. It should start as early as we can. And a lot of times what I find, however, is that SEL is taught in elementary school. And then by middle school, the mentality is, well, they already know it. They are, oh, I love Jolie. They teach in preschool. That's awesome. But oftentimes it happens in elementary school and then it drops off in middle school. The skills that students need to be successful in SEL are constantly changing as students get older. Really what schools should do is a pre-K through 12th grade approach. Now, how they teach it is going to be different, but I would really recommend a pre-K through 12th grade approach and really pushing your site or district administrator to really think about an SEL sort of continuum. It isn't kind of over here and over here. It is a continuum. There is a through line. Well, Amber, there is actually, oh, why don't we have, well, we do have SEL standards, I believe. I don't know if California does, but other states have them now. I would definitely check out a resource called, I'll type it in the chat here, a great resource. There's an organization called SEL4, the number 4CA California. There's also a Department of Social Emotional Learning now at the CDE, the California Department of Education. And I don't know if they fully adopted standards. I know other states have, like I know Ohio now has state standards for SEL. Colorado has state standards for SEL. So if we don't have it yet in California, it's coming because what we're finding is that if we don't meet the social and emotional needs of students, academic gains are just not going to be significant.
Sam, we had a comment earlier. What can we say, or what kind of guidance might you be able to provide for somebody who has is a service provider like the OTs, like SLP, etc., who want to be inclusive, but where we're providing those services within a general ed classroom may not always be ideal and or appropriate.
Couple things. One, I would really encourage any SLP, OT, PT to talk with general ed teachers about an opportunity to go in and speak to the class and share with the class about what their role is at the school. I think a lot of times OTs and SLPs and PTs are, because they're never given that platform to introduce themselves and talk about their role at the school with all students, that they are viewed as exclusionary. And it becomes this like, oh, well, only the SDC kids work with, so-and-so, right? Or only, Joey in our class works with so-and-so because there's something wrong with him. There's something he needs help with, right? So really building that in the first 6 to 8 weeks of school, I think is really, really a great tool, because then the next time you go and ask, oh, hey, Larkin, I'm glad you're here. The next time you go in and pull a kid out of the classroom, it's not this like, hush, hush, we have to be quiet about it, but other kids will say hi to you. You know what I mean? And the student who's leaving the room to get an outside service isn't like ashamed or embarrassed, but like actually they're like feeling pretty cool. Like they get to go with someone who the other students know. So I think that's a really good strategy. Yes, it reduces the stigma, Christina. And again, it's one of these really, really simple things. It's like, why don't we do this? We have so many chats coming in. This is great. I love it. The other way to reduce the stigma is, if it's appropriate, have the student that you are working with invite a buddy, invite someone else. I don't think there's anything that says a gen ed student can't go with a student who receives services just to be a peer buddy, a peer friend. Check it out. So I think those are great ways to kind of make it a little more inclusive. I think, Danny, we've got so much going on in the chat. I think we should maybe stop the screen share and kind of move into the more structured Q&A session here.
There we go.
So what other questions do we have, Dan?
So Sam, one of the things you were talking about.
Are you there? All right, let me pull up the Q&A. We might have lost Dan for a minute. How do we get peer buy-in? So I'm not sure if this question is about classmates or colleagues. If it's about colleagues, I think one of the things is in schools, classmates. So peer buy-in for inclusion. Let me see here. Let's get a little more information. Oh, peer buy-in for true inclusion. I think I got the question now, Allison. Thanks for clarifying. First of all, teachers need to show that they value it. As we all know, if you've ever been a teacher, kids are much more aware of what's going on than we think. And they pick up and are influenced by our responses to things. So for example, if a teacher, a gen ed teacher, has SDC students that are visiting the classroom, and when they visit the classroom, they don't have a desk with their name on it, they don't have a cubby with their name on it, that automatically the teacher is kind of influencing that they aren't a true part of the classroom. So therefore, there's going to be less peer buy-in. If the teacher uses a sympathetic approach rather than an empathetic approach, the peers aren't going to have buy-in. So I think it really comes from the way in which the teacher is engaging a diverse group of students together, and the way the teacher is framing inclusive opportunities. Because the way in which they frame it will rub off and inspire students to be inclusive change makers of tomorrow, or perpetuate more of this exclusionary sort of perspective. I'm going to read another question here. I'm coaching a few school buildings and supporting inclusion. I have many motivated typical peers who are excited to create relationship with their classmates with cognitive disabilities. At the same time, they struggle to figure out how to create these relationships. AAC training for peers has helped, and this is an area of need. The students are there, which is an improvement. They are accepted, which is great. What resources can I offer to schools to help promote more engagement and friendships during lunch, recess, and class? All right. So here's where it gets a little tricky. We want to ensure that we are not forcing inclusion. Forcing inclusion would be things like a teacher saying, okay, so-and-so, this is so-and-so, they're going to eat lunch with you, right? Because that automatically is kind of showing that one student is kind of sympathetically there to support another student. I think one way to start is really consider ways in which we're the same. So thinking about same ice cream flavors, same sports we like, same animals we like, things of that nature. So starting with some of those low risk opportunities to build connections and talk about how we're the same rather than how we're different. I also think that it's really important to share books and videos that spotlight and highlight students with similar disabilities. Because sometimes what happens in schools is that the typically developing peers view their classmate with the difference as the only one, right? So we want to use books, we want to use videos to help them realize like, oh, this isn't the only person in the world who lives with X, Y, or Z. This is one person who lives with X, Y, and Z. Christina, I love it. Students need to always start with their day with the class, line up and be included in the community. Classmates, the buy-in is there, the how is lacking. They want to interact, but don't always know how. I think sometimes we really have to do more explicit teaching. I think sometimes in schools, we say, include everybody, be respectful, be nice, be kind, right? We throw these statements out. Then when we ask students, we're asking them just to simply regurgitate, but we very rarely kind of go deep. Role playing is a great strategy. Taking your kids out to the playground, role playing out there about how you could adapt something for an individual student, being really, really explicit. Yeah, Tabitha's sharing about her daughter in the chat about wanting to be treated not as special, right? This whole idea of like special needs, like, oh, no more, right? This isn't special. We're not, everyone is just different, disability or ability, right? We're just different. We have different needs. We have different triggers. We have different struggles. Dan, have you joined us again?
Oh yeah, I'm here.
All right. I'll let you take back over as moderator.
No, that's fine. Yeah, just wanted to just keep the chat room open. We have a few minutes, and we don't need to necessarily take up everybody's time just to take up their time, but we do have a few minutes if there are any lingering questions or any anything that's out there.
Oh, I love Celeste that
There,
your student who lives with autism can actually articulate that.
okay, and we have somebody who raised a hand, and it's I believe, and whoever that is, please feel free to unmute and ask your question. But I believe we have some people logging in from the Philippines, some allies and accomplices from the Philippines. And folks, they're like, it's like the middle of the night. It's probably 1 a.m. in the Philippines. So if that is you and you've raised your hand, please unmute and ask your question.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, thanks for joining us. What's your question or thought?
So my question is this. Typically, the Philippines raise some awareness regarding about the SPED class, which is hypothetically, um, I think I think the Philippine government did not recognize what is the meaning of SPED, or what's the meaning of special education. Can you please briefly educate us about what is the meaning of special education?
So here in the States, if a student is showing signs that they might have a disability that fits within what's called IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, I believe, don't quote me on this, I think maybe there's 13 or 15 categories now, they keep changing it. So if a student, if there's concern that a student may have a diagnosed disability that fits within IDEA, they get evaluated. And if the evaluation shows that there's an adverse effect between their diagnosed disability and their aptitude to perform in school, they then would be referred to the program that we call special education, which then would walk them through the IEP process to ensure that they get the supports or services that they need to be successful. That's kind of a brief version of it.
Thank you so much, Sir
Yeah.
Sam. Thank you so much for your thank you so much for your advice. Thank you so much, sir.
You're very welcome. Thanks for joining us. Looks like Allison has a question in the chat. You want to read that, Dan?
Yeah, sure thing. It says, how about drawing typical peers or typically developing peers out on their own difficulties to try to make disability less of a fence, where a big chunk of students are on one side of this fence and then a smaller number of students are on the other side of the fence. And I think this kind of goes back to the self-awareness that you were talking about earlier, maybe Sam, I don't know if you want to touch on that.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so like universal about social emotional learning and inclusion, right? Self-awareness is universal, right? Whether you're a neurotypical or a neurodiverse student, we all can engage in self-awareness reflection. Within self-awareness, one of the things that we think about, we work with students on is, what are your strengths? What are your needs? I've kind of been shying away from using the words challenges or weaknesses to needs instead, because we all need things. We all need food. We all need water, right? We all need certain necessities to survive. And so really ensuring that our SEL proactive lessons are differentiated and we include students with disabilities, or we include our neurodiverse population in those SEL learning experiences, that's the way that you'll start to bridge that. I don't know if this question, Allison, if you're asking more about like disability simulation activities, is that what you're kind of going at? Like, should we be doing those?
I wasn't.
Oh,
'cause
okay.
I had heard that those can actually lead to more of a pity mentality. There's concern that can lead to more of a pity mentality. So I wasn't actually talking about that. I was talking about, like you said, self-examining and saying, hey, we all have needs and there's less of a difference in otherness.
Exactly. And one of the things that I found in, facilitating some of these workshops, because some of my work is I'll go to schools and I'll teach lessons and other teachers will observe, is I found that when we have students with and without disabilities together, we're doing self-awareness learning. We start by really talking about our differences. We always end that conversation by talking about how we're the same. And that's really the power.
Sam, I think I think our colleagues from the Philippines have their hands raised and might have another question. Feel free to unmute and ask away.
Well, sir, can I ask some further questions? So,
ahead.
okay, thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to talk about the situation about the Philippines. Well, maybe, sir, I'm asking about the situation in here, the Philippines. Can you please give me some advice regarding about the SPED teachers, which is special education teachers, to give some any advocacies to their students how they could manage on the different disabilities, or I mean how they can handle those students, because I think they I think they need a lot of experiences to talk about some instances regarding about the disabilities of the students here in the Philippines. I think they need to make some they need to nurture those students who are capable to learn, because in the Philippines I think they three-fourth as a percentage ranking, they disregards they disregards on the opportunity to learn. I think they have given the proper opportunity for the students to learn. What can you give on the SPED teacher in the Philippines? How, for briefly, I'm so sorry for my English. I'm not totally well spoken about my
No
English.
worries. I think I might have gotten gist of your question. I'm also going to drop my email address again in the chat. Like I said, not just to you, but everyone on today's call, I'm more than happy to connect with anyone beyond today's session. I'm happy to set up a private meeting, private Zoom with you, or share additional resources. If you're interested in talking about how changing perspectives could support your school, I'm happy to do that as well. But I think what you're asking is kind of this idea that we even struggle with here in the States, which is how do we ensure high expectations for our students with disabilities? That oftentimes we assume, even as adults trained in this, we make assumptions about a student's abilities. And when we do that, we limit their opportunities. We limit their academic opportunities. We limit their social opportunities. So it really is, I always say when I do trainings just around inclusion, the number one, I don't know if anyone can guess this in the chat. What do you think the number one barrier is for inclusive education in schools? I'm just curious, in our last minute, drop it in the chat. Number one barrier around inclusion and inclusive education in schools. Yes, all right, the first person got it. It is mindsets. It's mindsets, it's attitudes, it's value systems. I literally was working with a group of teachers yesterday and I said, I could give you 100, 200, 300 strategies or tools for your toolbox around inclusive education. But if you don't have an inclusive mindset, those tools are never going to be used, or they're not going to be used with fidelity, and they're not going to be used the way they're intended to be used. So the first part of all of this is changing mindsets, becoming more aligned with mindsets. And that's part of what I wanted to share today, is this mindset, this connection between SEL and inclusion. If we could start to overcome those humps, then teachers are more receptive to the trainings. They're willing to try new things. Administrators are willing to adjust master scheduling to adapt to these other areas. So I know that we are at our time. Dan, do you have any sort of closing remarks or next steps for conference?
Absolutely. Yeah, just a big thank you, Sam, and thank you to everybody in attendance for your allyship and to our students with disabilities and their families. It's our mission to grow our educational system to innovate, include, and impact outcomes positively for all, from birth to adulthood and beyond. All of these presentation materials and slides and resources can be accessed in the session description section on the VFAIR's agenda page. Be sure to join us for the closing keynote right after lunch. Also connect in our social lounge and our roundtables with like-minded attendees, and post on our social media using the hashtag SIPCon 2023. So with that, have a great rest of your day. We'll see you at the keynote in just a few moments. Thanks again, Sam.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you for the love in the chat. Thanks for all you're doing for our kids.